Everybody have a seat, please. Thank you to Hampton-based schools for the use of the auditorium. Thank you. Special thank you to Lawrence Clemenson, Superintendent, and Larry Luce, the Deputy Superintendent, for their continued support of the Hampton-based Civic Association, and especially putting us up here for this debate and decorating and getting everything ready for us. I'd love to welcome our two candidates for the 1st Congressional District, Congressman Tim Bishop, our incumbent, and New York State Senator Lee Zeldin, the challenger. Thank you. The exits are at the rear. If you need to exit, there are no signs allowed in the auditorium. There'll be no shouting out, no noisemakers. This is not a football game or a soccer game. This is going to be a debate. We have high school students here who are going to be learning from your example. You are to set a good example for the students. Clap when you like an answer. Anyone not behaving will be escorted out. You'll be given one warning and then escorted out. Now, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, and we have Mackenzie who will be leading us.
To the flag, United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mackenzie. Now we'll have an opening statement, which will be 3 minutes long, and we're going to start with Lee Zeldin.
As I traveled around this congressional district talking to voters, what I hear so often is that so many people believe our country is heading in the wrong direction. We have politicians down in Washington who prioritize their own reelection above all else. Partisan bickering, political posturing. You have Republicans blaming Democrats, Democrats blaming Republicans, and the fact is there's plenty of blame to go around to all the parties. Meanwhile, we have families right here on Long Island who are struggling to make ends meet. Young families who are moving down south because they can't afford to buy their first home here. Seniors who have spent their whole lives on Long Island and want to stay. They've reached their breaking point after getting to that position where they're deciding between oil in their tank or prescription drugs. And they're heading down south. We cannot change Washington unless we change the people we send there to represent us. We can't keep re-electing the same people over and over and over again and ever expect a different result. I believe it's time for new leadership, a stronger voice, and a fresh perspective. I was born and raised here on Long Island. My daughters now go to the same elementary school that I went to, William Floyd Community, a working class community. I was honored to serve in the United States Army. I was a military intelligence officer, a prosecutor, a magistrate, had the opportunity to deploy to Iraq with the 82nd Airborne Division, and I'm honored to still serve today as a major in the Army Reserves. It's also a privilege to serve as a New York State Senator, where I've been able to keep my commitments, repealing the MTA payroll tax for 80% of employers, reducing middle-income tax rates to the lowest level in 60 years, eliminating the saltwater fishing license fee, enacting the nation's strongest property tax cap, creating the PFC Joseph Dwyer program for our veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic brain injury. This race gives you a clear choice between a problem solver and a backbencher. I have a 5-point plan that I believe will move our country forward. It's about growing our economy, creating more good-paying private sector jobs, securing our borders and America's interests overseas, fighting for our veterans who fought for us, repealing and replacing Obamacare, which is leading to higher premiums, higher deductibles, lost doctors, canceled policies, and longer wait times. And fifth, I believe in a quality education for our children. I believe in higher standards, but Common Core is not the answer. If you support the Obama, Pelosi, Bishop agenda, well, maybe you should vote for my opponent. But if you want a new direction for America, if you believe that our nation is not heading in the right direction, I ask for your support. 12 years is enough. It's time to term limit Tim. I'm asking for your vote on November 4th.
Thank you. Tim?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this evening, and I thank you all for coming out. It's a particular pleasure for me to be in this school district, as my daughter is the librarian in the middle school here, and I know the seniors are going to ask the first questions. Well, those seniors were sixth graders when my daughter started here, and they were her first class, so I'll look forward to your question. I've had the privilege of serving the people of this district for 12 years. This also is my home. I was born about 7 or 8 miles from here, and I've lived my entire life about 7 or 8 miles from here. I'm very proud of the service that I and my staff have provided over these 12 years. I'm proud of the constituent service that we've provided. We've successfully resolved about 17,000 cases. Now, you'll hear probably at some point this evening my opponents say that that's a given. Guess what? It's not a given. To successfully resolve that many cases over that period of time takes skill and dedication and commitment, and it also takes the relationships that a member and his or her staff develops over the period of time that they're in office, and we use those relationships to help the constituents that we were elected to serve. I'm proud of my legislative record. I have been a central figure in 2 pieces of legislation that are absolutely important to young people who want to go to college: the Student Aid and Financial Responsibility Act and the College Cost Reduction Act. Both have made it easier for students to go to college, less expensive to borrow, and have provided them with additional grant assistance at no new cost to taxpayers. I was one of 4 people, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, that wrote one of the few pieces of legislation that this Congress, substantive legislation, that this Congress has passed this year, the Water Resources Development Act. We brought it to the floor of the House about 10 days after the government shutdown, a time of great turmoil and great passion, great conflict in the Congress, and we were able to get 413 votes to pass it. We did it because I was able to reach across the aisle and solve problems and be willing to do something that had become in very short supply in Washington, and that's compromise. Now, that's a legislative record. He calls me a backbencher, that's fine, but backbenchers don't get 413 votes, and they don't have the respect of their Republican colleagues to get things passed the way I do. Last thing I will say, I ran 12 years ago because I wanted to be a voice for the middle class. I've been that voice for the middle class. I grew up in a middle class family that was sustained by how hard my father and mother worked, and I wanted to go to Congress and be a voice for those kinds of families that live paycheck to paycheck, that work hard for every single thing they get, provide for their kids, provide for their parents if they're still alive. That's what I've done. With your support, I will continue to do that over the next 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim. Now we have Alex Dombrowski from the Hampton Bays High School government class who's going to ask the first question. Alex?
With the cost of living on Long Island being one of the highest in the nation, students that grew up locally fear that there is no industry or opportunity to make a comfortable living here. What is being done to combat this issue?
Okay, Tim, you want to...
Do I go first?
Yeah, you go first. Yes, I'm sorry.
It's a great question, and it's a real challenge. I think the things that we have to do to both create and protect middle... Is there anything we can do about this reverb? create and protect middle-class jobs on Long Island, we have to invest in education, we have to invest in infrastructure, and we have to invest in the high-tech professions and the high-tech skills that have driven the economy of Long Island since World War II. And we're not doing that, frankly. I have been a voice for investment in infrastructure. This bill that I just referred to, the Water Resources Development Act, is an investment in infrastructure. $12.8 million worth of projects will be funded through that bill. It's going to create thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of jobs, protecting our water infrastructure and protecting our shorelines and protecting our inland waterways system. I believe firmly that the pathway into the middle class and the ability to stay in the middle class is higher education. And that's why I've worked so hard to see to it that students have that opportunity to climb that next rung on the ladder and be able to get their slice of the American dream. And that's why the federal government and frankly the state government has to continue the investments that they're making. And it's also why I've worked so hard to bring federal dollars to Long Island to keep jobs here. I led the effort to save 1,000 jobs at Brookhaven Lab. We were successful. I led the effort to keep 950 air traffic control jobs here, good, solid middle-class jobs, by building the new air traffic control facility right here on Long Island. Those are the kinds of things I've done. Those are the kinds of things I'm committed to, and those are the kinds of things I'm going to continue to do.
The cost of living really is a challenge for everyone, young families to seniors. There's a lot that contributes to that. For people who own a home, the property taxes that they're paying, the fact that we have the highest corporate and individual marginal income tax rates in the entire country. The energy costs are really high here on Long Island. Whether it's the cost to fill up your oil tank, to heat your home, or to fill up your gas tank to get to work. There's a lot of costs related to healthcare. The fact that networks have shrunk since Obamacare has gone into place, as practices get bought up by hospitals, and we're seeing premiums and deductibles go up. Everything adds up, and people have a different breaking point. There's no one single solution, one piece of legislation that is going to make all of our challenges go away, but it's important for us to elect people to office who understand the plight of our small business owners, who are foregoing their own paycheck in order to pay their employee. Because all of these costs that contribute to your overhead impact your ability to balance both sides of the ledger. We get it. Our individuals, families, we all have to balance the budget. Local governments have to. Small businesses have to. The only people who don't have to balance a budget is the federal government. They don't even pass budgets. They've only passed one federal budget since 2007. So we need to elect people who have experience not just signing the back of a check, but the front of a check as well, and taking advantage of any opportunity to reduce the cost of living, to reduce the burdensome regulations that are driving businesses out of state. We need to create not just more public sector jobs, we need to encourage more private sector growth and good paying private sector jobs. We have to be in touch with that as well, and we have too many businesses leaving here, and it's unfortunately driving our young families away.
Second question is from the Hampton Bay Civic Association, and Lee, you'll lead this off. Please explain how you will support the rebuilding of Dune Road, one of our basic infrastructures here.
It really should have been done by now. I mean, after Superstorm Sandy hit, we saw by the first Memorial Day, Jones Beach had new roads, new dunes. Money was flowing into Staten Island and Brooklyn and Queens and New Jersey. You could go to parts of the Jersey Shore right now that look stronger than they were before. They didn't just rebuild. They recovered stronger than they were before Sandy hit. And in January of, 2014, there was an announcement, January 2013, of $60 billion that was getting passed by Congress and flowing to all the states impacted by Sandy. And we saw all this money going in everywhere else, and we had so many press conferences and press releases announcing $700 million for the Fire Island to Montauk Point plan. And Meanwhile, here we are having a debate in the middle of the second hurricane season after that, and the money still hasn't come here yet. And all we get are excuses. We have elected officials who come here, they ask for your vote, they say, if you elect me, this is what I'm going to do. And then they come back 2 years later with their best possible excuse they could come up with, that if you give me another 2 years, I'll get it done next time. We need a stronger voice, and we need someone who is just raising heck. When you're not seeing money coming back to our area like everywhere else impacted by Sandy, there's a lot of outrage on the streets, whether you live out here in the town of Southampton or you live in the village of Mastic Beach. We're tired of reading the new Newsday story of the new deadline and the new excuse as to why we're waiting longer. We want action. When it comes time for an election, we want our incumbent to come here under the banner of promises made, promises kept. Not give me another 2 years and I'll try to get it done next time. This is something that should have been done by now. We shouldn't even be sitting here having to answer that question.
I know it's annoying to let facts get in the way of a good attack, but let me just provide the facts, okay? The New York Division of the Army Corps of Engineers is handling 60 Sandy-related recovery projects. They have handled recovery projects so far in 3 phases. The first was to prepare really exigent circumstances where the damage needed to be repaired immediately because it threatened life and limb. An example of that, which my opponent neglects to mention, is the fact that I had the Army Corps here within 2 weeks of the storm to close one of the breaches along the Fire Island coast. The other breach was not closed because the New York State DEC said they didn't want to close it. I also had the Corps here to do the beach nourishment project to the west of Shinnecock Inlet, the project we call WOSI, west of Shinnecock Inlet. They were here in early December of 2013. Next, they went to repair previously constructed Corps projects to their pre-storm condition. Some of the projects that my opponent is referring to fall into that category. The next phase that they're going to are to deal with interim projects. There are only 2 of them. One is Fire Island, and the other is Montauk, downtown Montauk. And the first of those projects that's going to be done for the entire span of the 60 projects that the Corps is managing is the Smith Point Park project, which we were slated to do until the Audubon Society came in, asked for a TRO, the TRO was granted, and the project been put on hold. But that project is the first of 60 projects. So as I said, those are the facts. I understand it's much more fun to attack when you're on the sidelines and you're not involved in getting it done. But those are the facts, and the fact that the Corps was ready to go with the Fire Island project was because of my advocacy and Senator Schumer's advocacy.
Now we have a question from Kyle from the Southampton Press.
Thanks, Bruce. According to the U.S. Office of Refugee Resettlement, between January 1st and August 31st, 1,300 unaccompanied minors have been brought to Suffolk County. And that's the 3rd highest in a single county throughout the country, only behind LA County and Harris County, Texas, which is Houston, those of you who don't know. My question is, what do you think the federal government's role should be in supporting the school districts, such as Hampton Bays, that are educating these unaccompanied minors? And second of all, what do you think the federal government should do to handle the backlog of children who are waiting to hear for amnesty?
Tim, you lead off.
A couple things. First off, for school districts that are disproportionately impacted by these refugee kids, there's no question in my mind that the federal government has to step in and has to provide assistance to local school districts so that they can accommodate these kids. And there's discussions going on right now about making that happen. And Long Island, as the questioner said, is one of the areas that have been more heavily impacted than others. There are 10 of those children right here in this school district. Now, I've spoken with the business manager of the school district, I've spoken with the superintendent. Often what people do is they say, well, if it costs, fill in the blank, $22,000 to educate a kid, and you have 10 more, the school district's taking on $220,000 worth of additional costs. That's not the case. The school district has been able to accommodate these 10 additional kids within a total expenditure of $14,000, and they've been able to accommodate that by by moving money around in their budget. Now, if the numbers continue to grow, they're not going to have that ability to do that, and clearly the federal government has to step in. To the larger question of what should we be doing, the president made a proposal this summer, early July, to do lots of things, but the most important things that he did was that he requested funding so that we could hire additional immigration law judges to go to the border to expedite these removal proceedings that these kids are entitled to by law. That was not accepted by the Congress. I think that was a mistake, frankly. It also provided money to try to deal with the root cause of the problem. The root cause of the problem is what's going on in Central America. And these are kids, they're kids that are trying to escape horrendous, horrific situations. And what the president was proposing is that we provide money to combat these gangs, to combat the drug lords, and to provide opportunity for real economic development in those countries. That's the root cause, and that's what we need to do. But for schools, to the extent that they're disproportionately impacted, the federal government has an obligation to step in.
I would argue that the federal government has an obligation to make sure that this crisis isn't upon us in the first place. I mean, the president is saying the president is sending a very clear message to these parents in these Central American and Southern American countries that if they turn their kids over to coyotes and their kids get here, that they'll be granted amnesty. One of the best examples you could come up with of recent dysfunction in Washington is the president put forth his proposal, the Senate Democrats put forth their proposal, and the House Republicans put forth a proposal. This was all in July. And then at the end of the July, the Congress went home for their recess. The president went to Martha's Vineyard to work on his golf score, and they weren't talking to each other because Congress went back in a session for the last 2 weeks. And while they were there, they should have been voting on a compromise. The problem is that you have people in Washington who their only version of compromise is to get it 100% their way. And if you want, when you have Republicans and Democrats sharing power in Washington, whether you are liberal, moderate, or conservative, you need to be reasonable and rational, willing to sit down at a table with your colleagues to try to hammer out agreements where you can find common ground. There are multiple solutions about how to humanely detain these unaccompanied immigrant children at the border, to have increased technology so that we can reduce backlogs from judges' courtrooms all around the country, to make sure that we are expeditiously reuniting these children with their families back home.
Yeah.
Vitally important that our elected officials work together to solve this problem, and unfortunately, dysfunction is ruling the day.
This is a question from Eve of Hampton Bays, and we'll go to Lee first. What specific steps would you implement to better protect our water resources and general environment?
Up in Albany, we were working on a piece of legislation that Senator Ken LaValle took the lead with in the state Senate. And we have retiring colleague, Assemblyman Bob Sweeney, took the lead in the Assembly, working closely with Dick Amper from the Pine Barrens Society to try to protect Long Island's water quality. It went through numerous negotiations amongst the senator and the assemblyman and the different interested parties. Unfortunately, there wasn't a bill passed before the end of session, but there was a very active dialogue going on up in Albany to try to protect our aquifer. And I think that everyone really, if you live here on Long Island, if you grew up in our waterways, if you visit our beaches, we are all pro-environment. And it's unfortunate that we even are having this debate. But what's very important in finding a solution with regards to these water quality concerns is that we are striking a final agreement that is reasonable. And to have a goal of having water quality that is better quality than this Poland Spring, and not worrying at all about the impacts on the unintended consequences on businesses is unfortunate. Now my opponent talks about how being pro-environment is pro-business, and in many cases, in many industries, that's very true. But I've seen on this particular issue, there's been so many sound bites and misunderstandings of fact that nothing's getting done at all. So I would advocate for all interested parties who want to see legislation done in Albany that we spend this time outside of session to try to hammer out a final agreement on Senator Lavalle's water quality bill. And in Washington, I think that the smartest thing would be to allow state and local control to hammer out an agreement to get this done.
Water quality is absolutely essential to health, it's absolutely essential to our environment, it's absolutely essential to economic development, particularly for a pristine area like Eastern Long Island. It's an area that I've spent a lot of time working on. I'm the senior Democrat on what's called the Water Resources and Environment Subcommittee, because in that capacity that I was one of 4 people to write the Water Resources Development Act. And in that act, at my insistence, is 2 things. There's a reauthorization of what's called the State Revolving Fund, which is the principal means by which the federal government finances wastewater infrastructure projects that take place in the states. This is the first time that the State Revolving Fund was included in the WRDA bill, the Water Resources Development Bill. And I also championed and insisted that was in the bill be a new form of financing for water infrastructure projects. And by the way, we have a $300 billion backlog of water infrastructure projects across the country. But this new financing instrument is something called WIFIA. And what it does is it allows municipalities to borrow directly from the Treasury at low rates, which they can then use to leverage other dollars coming in, such as private dollars, because one of the areas of water infrastructure now that has some currency is public-private partnerships, so that we can begin to get a handle on this backlog. And I'm very hopeful that this new financing instrument is going to allow the federal government to reclaim the role that it used to play. Up until the Reagan presidency, the federal government financed 70% of water infrastructure projects all across the country. That's long gone. And one of the reasons we have a $300 billion backlog is because the federal government walked off the field and the states and the counties and the towns couldn't pick it up. With this legislation that I helped write, and yes, I compromised to get it, it is an opportunity for the federal government to get back on the field and help solve these problems.
Question is from Ernest of Mount Sinai, and Cindy will read this off. Are you satisfied with the program known as Obamacare as it stands? If not, would you change it? How would you make it better or replace it?
I think the Affordable Care Act is a work in progress. I think the Affordable Care Act is a work in progress. And if you'll let me finish my answer, thank you. There are lots of things about the Affordable Care Act that are going to require revision and being addressed. And in any mature legislative body, such as the one we had after Medicare was passed, we would be addressing them. But the House of Representatives is not a mature legislative body. What the House of Representatives has done is a feckless exercise to 52 times pass legislation, one House only legislation, that would repeal Obamacare. What we need to do is fix the pieces of it that aren't working, but emphasize the pieces of it that are working. Insurance companies can no longer tell you that your policy is canceled if you're sick. That's a good thing. Insurance companies can no longer tell you that if you have a child with asthma, you can't buy a policy. That's a good thing. Kids up to the age of 26 can stay on their parents' policies. There's 3 million of them in this country that now have insurance that previously didn't. That's a good thing. Seniors have saved almost $12 billion in their prescription drug costs because of closing the donut hole. Now, if someone were to propose taxing seniors $12 billion, everybody would think they were lunatics, right? But that's precisely what my opponent is proposing when he says that we should repeal Obamacare. And by the way, if we are going to repeal Obamacare, which by the way we're not, but I would be very interested to know what's the solution? Because everyone recognized pre the passage of the Affordable Care Act that the system we had wasn't working. It was bankrupting families. I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone? It was bankrupting families, it was bankrupting every level of government, and that's the problem we're trying to fix, and we're getting a handle on it.
I've actually, over the course of the last 4 years, have enjoyed interacting with the incumbent. Our offices have worked well together. We just have a philosophical difference on a lot of important issues facing this country. I personally believe that Obamacare needs to be repealed. I think that one of the reasons why these are one-house bills is that Harry Reid is not allowing a vote on any of these bills, and if on November 4th Republicans are able to gain control of the United States Senate, these wouldn't be one-house bills, they'd be on the president's desk for his signature or his veto, which is one of the reasons why the Republicans should gain control of the United States Senate. As far as seniors go, Obamacare cuts Medicare by over $700 million. It cuts Medicare Advantage by over $700 billion, cuts Medicare Advantage by $150 billion. Our seniors, just like our young families, our women, our children, everyone is seeing lost doctors, canceled policies, longer wait times, less choice, less networks available. We're facing situations where families are going into the exchange. They're finding a policy for the husband and wife and 2 of their kids, but not for their 18-month-old. The system's just not working. It hasn't been implemented correctly. Now, there have been numerous solutions that have been put forth by Republicans. But here's the thing. The Democrats never read their own bill. So we can't expect them to read any of ours. It would be very productive if the incumbent was to read either Tom Price's bill or Tom Coburn's bill or Ted Poe's bill. They're in bill form. These bills exist of what to replace Obamacare with. There are parts of Obamacare, like the pre-existing conditions or allowing children to stay on their parents' policies, which are good and effective, but there's a lot that needs to get changed, and the Republicans have alternatives.
Both of us what the rules are on rebuttal. I'm not entirely
1 minute, you get a 1 minute rebuttal, you get 2 of them over the
Get
course.
2 of them over the course of the evening.
Right. Like
Okay, I'm going to take one of my 1 minutes.
Okay.
Couple things. Number one, the Republicans have controlled the House of Representatives for 4 years. They control everything in terms of what comes to the floor and when. So if there was a real Affordable Care Act alternative that they supported, we'd have seen it by now. First bill they passed, January 2011, H.R. 1, repeal and replace. Repeal Obamacare, and then charge the 3 committees of jurisdiction, Ways and Means, Energy and Commerce, and Education, with coming up with a replacement. Guess what? We're 4 years in, no replacement. So if we're going to have a serious discussion here, let's have a discussion. But let's not have a one-sided discussion where one side irresponsibly says repeal, 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 but offers nothing as an alternative. Now guess what? 13 million Americans, our fellow citizens, now have insurance that they didn't have a year ago. Does anyone want to say that's a bad thing? If the Republicans have a plan that's going to ensure 13 to 15 to 18 million Americans and drive down the cost of healthcare. Healthcare inflation is at its lowest point in 30 years. Good thing.
Now we have rebuttal.
If you visit my opponent's website right now, on his website it tells you that if you want to keep your doctor, you can, and if you want to keep your plan, you can. And again, as I mentioned, with regards to Tom Price or Ted Poe or Tom Coburn, there are numerous proposals that are out there that are being discussed about allowing small businesses to pull policies, to allow the portability of policies across state lines, to allow those in the Medicaid population who aren't going back to work because they're afraid they're going to lose their Medicaid coverage, to allow more private choice so that they can go back into the workforce and have a plan that best fits their policy for their family. There's solutions with regards to tax credits to allow families who are struggling to make ends meet to be able to go out and purchase a better policy that fits their family. These are all in bill form right now. So to suggest that we don't have any solutions is it's just absolutely inaccurate, and I would recommend that you update your website.
Let me just start off with the next question. This question is very long, and I'm just going to paraphrase it. It's about privatizing Social Security. And if Social Security is privatized, would there be several alternatives besides U.S. Treasuries in the stock market? What would it be like? And would people have to be mandatory or voluntary for privatization?
One of the most shameful things that we see during campaigns is that people say things because they poll well and not because they are true, because they're trying to win an election. There are seniors here who, when you put on TV, are watching ads from the Democratic Congressional Committee where there's a senior from Blue Point telling seniors here in this crowd that I support privatizing their Social Security, which I have never said in any way, shape, or form. I never will, and I don't support it. I support preserving and protecting the Social Security guarantee for our seniors who are relying on it, paid into it. It's a commitment and a promise that was made to them that they expect. And for people who are close to retirement, they all need to know that this system that they paid into, that the money is going to be there. And again, I have never in any way, shape, or form supported privatizing any component of your Social Security. And it's unfortunate that the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee decides that they really, really want to keep my opponent in. They really want to hold on to their power, their prestige, their perks. They will say anything at all costs. And it applies to a lot of things, like my opponent saying they don't support equal pay for equal work, even though I helped get that bill passed twice up in Albany. You know, from one issue to the next, my opponent is saying things because they poll well and not because they are true. And this is a perfect example of something that if my opponent really wanted to have an honest debate on facts, he would make a statement right now to this audience with the cameras rolling, calling on the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee to take down that ad of that senior in Blue Point. Because what he is saying is untrue, and it's shameful that you're letting this go on. You should make a statement.
Couple things. First off, I appreciate the suggestion on the website. I'll take that into consideration. Secondly, if you want to talk about shameful ads that campaign committees are running, take a look at the one that's running on your behalf, and then why don't you look into that camera, and why don't you renounce that, which I doubt you will do, because that's the only bullet you got. The other thing that I would say...
Come on, back it up!
The other thing that I would say is my opponent did in fact say in the 2008 campaign, it was reported in Newsday, that he supported privatizing Social Security. Never once during our 2008 campaign did he disavow that statement. Maybe he's disavowing it now, maybe he's had a change of heart. If he has, God bless. But he said in 2008 that he supported the privatization of Social Security. Now, I do not support the privatization of Social Security. I think the privatization of Social Security ruins Social Security. We do have to fix Social Security, but we've got to be guided by two principles. One is that it can't increase our debt, and the second is it can't increase our deficit. And guess what? Privatization, am I interrupting you? Privatization does both. Because when you privatize and you allow people to keep their money and not put it into the trust fund, it's a program that is a pay-as-you-go program. So if my children stop putting money into the trust fund because they're going to privatize it for themselves, who is going to pay the benefits of my generation? That's how the program has always worked. It's been a program where the generation that works pays for the generation that's retired. And when you allow the generation that's working to segregate their money to take care of just themselves, the system falls apart. And so to fix it, we have to look at every other option except privatizing. But I certainly do not support privatization, and if my opponents change his mind, I'm glad he's seen the light.
This question is from Marty of Riverhead, and Tim, you'll lead off. What is your position on the timber, oil, and gas companies' attempts to open the federal parks to exploitation?
My own view is that we are doing plenty to increase oil production in this country. Let me give you a couple of facts. We have increased the number of barrels that we produce per day from 2008 to 2014 by 70%. We have increased the amount of natural gas that we produce each day by 23%. We have reduced our dependence on foreign oil by about half. In 2008, about 58% of the oil we used was imported. Today, it's 27%. So we have made great progress. And we have done so both on public lands and on private lands. An issue that we really ought to be examining, two issues. One, there are tens of thousands of acres, both public lands and private lands, that the oil companies have under lease that they're not using at all. So before we begin to encumber more lands and more leases for oil, we ought to let them have them use the leases that they already have. The second thing I would say is one of the things we need to do is stop these shameful, wasteful subsidies that we provide to oil companies. Big five oil companies made $93 billion in profits last year. They were subsidized to the tune of about $4 billion a year by the federal taxpayer. Now, why is that a good thing? Why is it that we can afford to give the richest corporations in the world a tax break, but we can't afford to send kids to college? We should be asking ourselves that question. And so I don't think that we need to, I think what we need to do is see to it that the oil companies use the leases that they already have, and I think we ought to recognize that we've made enormous progress. We have more oil and gas rigs operating in this country right now than the rest of the world combined. So we've made real progress. We still have a ways to go.
You know, it definitely kills all of us to watch how much we rely on countries that hate America. And right now, as we all watch the news, we all want to see more energy independence, more a reduced reliance on oil altogether, especially reduced reliance on foreign oil. As far as oil profits and oil companies, it's crazy that we are spending more at the pump so that you have speculators and individuals lining their own pockets. The Republicans and Democrats, if you look over the course of the last several years, have each been in charge down in Washington. There was a period of time where the Democrats had one-party rule in Congress, and right now, since then, you've had Republicans and Democrats sharing power. And I think that rather than just the sound bites that sound well, I'd like to actually see action on that. My opponent voted against the Keystone XL pipeline project. I would have voted for it. We have a difference of opinion on that, and that's okay. I believe that we can safely be utilizing our own domestic energy resources that can reduce our reliance on foreign oil. And I also think long-term we need to reduce our reliance on oil altogether. And there's a lot of alternative ways that, that we can fuel our gas tanks, that we can heat our homes. We need to continue to pursue that, so we're actually reducing our reliance on oil altogether. In the meantime, to just rely more on these foreign countries that hate us and watch the individuals over there line their pockets, which in its sense maybe fuels a lot of the activities that are harming America's interests abroad. We need to do more with our own domestic energy supply, and I believe that we can do it safely.
Lee will start this one off. Do you support wind power and placing windmills in Long Island Sound and the ocean around Long Island?
Sure, I support wind power. I think that that everyone basically realizes that doing anything within the line of sight of Long Island is unacceptable. It really doesn't seem like it's even on the table at this point. So I think that for some of the companies that want to pursue alternative energy, wind being one of them, we have a plant in the 3rd Senate District, which is also in the 1st Congressional District, called Caithness. That is more energy efficient than some of the national grid plants that are being operated, utilizing natural gas. It requires less employees, it's cleaner for the environment, it's better for the economy. We need to always be pursuing more up-to-date, energy efficient and environmentally sensitive means to be able to heat our homes and fill up our gas tanks. And I think that it really gets to the larger issue of the cost of living. One of the earlier questions from one of the high school students here is that it all adds up, all the different costs of living here on Long Island, the inability to buy your first home. Even if you find a job, you might not be making enough to make ends meet. You might not be able to pay the interests on your college loans. It all adds up, and for seniors, it's been a breaking point, and many have decided to leave. So, as the question pertains specifically to wind, I think that we really need to have a very healthy, substantive dialogue with Republicans and Democrats on all alternative means that can allow us to be more energy independent and to be more environmentally sensitive and also better on our pocketbooks.
Lee, I knew if we'd stay at this long enough, we'd find something we agreed upon. We absolutely have to pursue wind. Offshore wind is a very viable alternative. There are lots of proposals out there right now. We got to be conscious of 3 things as we pursue wind. One is the aesthetics, as Lee correctly points out. No one wants to sit on the beach and be looking at wind turbines. But the technology is now such that you can site them further offshore where you don't have the aesthetic issue. Second, we've got to be very protective of fishing grounds. Fishing is a very vital industry for eastern Long Island, for Massachusetts, for Connecticut, for Rhode Island. So we have to be careful about that, but it's a big ocean out there. We should be able to site it. And the third is we have to be very concerned about shipping lanes. This was something that I had not thought of until I met with a collection of people who are shippers, and they raised the issue. They're supportive of wind power, but they want to be careful about how we site it. So we absolutely have to pursue wind. One of the problems, though, is there's a wind production tax credit that the Republicans want to let expire because they believe it's wasteful and they believe it's subsidizing a form of energy that really is too expensive. Now, wind started off as expensive, but the technology has improved such that it is really starting to come down in price in terms of kilowatt hour. But we really do continue to need that production tax credit. And again, I'll go back to, if we're going to subsidize to the tune of $40 billion over 10 years, corporations that make almost $100 billion a year after taxes in aggregate, we can't throw a couple of pennies at wind? I mean, it doesn't make any sense, particularly when we know that we've got to reduce our carbon footprint if we're going to be able to leave a world for our children and their grandchildren and their grandchildren that's going to be as hospitable as the world has been to us. So I'm in agreement. I think we have to do it.
I think we had some very encouraging responses. All right, this next question comes from Brad of Northampton. Please explain your view of gay rights regarding marriage at the federal level. Tim?
I am a full supporter of marriage equality. I applaud the New York State Assembly and Senate and the governor for signing that into law in New York. I voted to repeal the bill in Washington that in the federal government that made same-sex couples ineligible for benefits, and also would not allow one state to recognize a marriage that took place in another state. I'm a full supporter of marriage equality. I think that we ought to be a nation that is sufficiently loving and sufficiently tolerant that we can not just allow but embrace two people who make a commitment to one another and want to share that commitment with the world and want to codify that commitment. I'm a full supporter, an enthusiastic supporter.
This vote actually for me was one of the most, or it was the most emotional vote that I went through during my 4 years up in Albany. For me, I believe that marriage should be defined between a man and a woman. We had advocates coming in favor of the legislation. We had other people lobbying against it. It was extremely passionate. You couldn't get literally from your elevator into a room to even discuss it without going through people singing and chanting. It's a very emotional topic. It's one that my opponent and I disagree on. I do believe that we have families who, as far as civil unions go and rights with regards to being able to provide for their family and to have a community and society of love and compassion is extremely important, and that's something that I support. It's just on this particular issue during a 2-year term in the New York State Senate, and I ran with issues related to repealing the MTA payroll tax and helping eliminate the saltwater fishing license fee, to create the PFC Joseph Dwyer program for our veterans. This is what drove me to office, to run for the New York State Senate. I wasn't running to get involved in that particular debate, but you know what? There are over 6,000 votes that I've taken 4 years up in Albany. One of the things we criticize about Washington is that